good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. This is Firoze Manji from Daraja Press. Welcome to today's discussion on Fanon today, the reason and revolt of the Wretched of the Earth, a book that was published very recently and edited by Nigel C. Gibson. We have an extraordinary lineup of people to discuss their chapters today. Toussaint Losier is the author of the chapter Setting Afoot of a New People, Prison Intellectuals, New African Communism, and the Making of Mediations on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. He teaches at the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of African American Studies at University of Massachusetts-Amherst, USA. We have from South Africa, Zikode, who I'm sure many of you know, is the author of the chapter The Power of Abahlali and Our Living Politic has been built with our blood. He's the president of the South African Shack Dwellers movement, Abahlali Basmajondolo, and he also facilitated a discussion led by Nigel Gibson with comrades from Abahlali. And from Brazil, we have Leah Tosold, who is the author of the chapter on territorializing existence as resistance, a Fanonian reading of the Munduruku and Riverside people's collective self-determination process in Amazonia. She teaches in the political science department of the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. I'd like to wish you all a very warm welcome to today. I think this is going to be a really interesting discussion today. I think because it brings together perspectives that are elaborated in this book, which are, I think, in many ways unusual. That it is not the what we normally see about Fanon, and giving a dimension that involves seeing what Fanon really means on the ground in real struggles, and how to actually interpret the extraordinary writings of Fanon, in particular The Wretched of the Earth, which many of you know is this year the 60th anniversary of its publication. So a warm welcome to you all, and Nigel, let me hand over to you to start the discussion.
Thank you, Firoze. Welcome everybody, and welcome to what is the third session on this book, Fanon Today, Reason and Revolt of the Wretched of the Earth. As Firoze mentioned, this discussion is central to the concept of what the book's about, and that is putting discussions of Fanon back where they should be, amongst movements from below, and being discovered and rethought and thought about among movements from below. Our first presenter, not really a presentation, but really opening of the discussion, is Zikode, who, as Firoze mentioned, is the author of a chapter called The Power of Abahlali and Our Living Politics Has Been Built with Our Blood. And the immediacy of the moment is expressed, and I'm sure Spoo will talk about this, in the release yesterday of three people who had been charged with murder, who were Abahlali militants, and at the same time the continual imprisonment of three others. The charges are trumped up, but I wanted to sort of emphasize another element of it that relates directly to the first page of my introduction, where I talk about the title of Fanon's Les Damnés de Terre, or the Wretched of the Earth, and its relationship to the song the Internationale, written by the communard Eugene Potier, and then articulated by the Haitian Marxist négritude poet Jacques Roman. And yesterday I was sent a short video of comrades from Abahlali, Basmon Jondolo singing the Internationale and making it their own, and giving meaning to it in a new context. And that is, in a certain sense, the living element of Fanon that we're going to be talking about today. So, Spoo, over to you.
So, Spoo, can you hear us?
Thank you, Comrade Nigel. Greetings to Comrade Firoze, my fellow.
Spoo, you're on mute now.
Okay. We're not hearing you, Spoo. Your mic has gone off for some reason. Okay, great.
You can.
We can hear you now. Great.
Much better now.
Much better.
Yes. Oh, great. Yes. Thank you so much to your. Yeah. I'm very grateful to participate in this wonderful discussion, of course, with great minds that are participating here, old comrades that I haven't met for some decades. It's just a wonderful moment. I just want to start off by locating Fanon in the context of Abahlali struggle, and do want to say, those who may not be familiar with Abahlali struggle, these are the shack dwellers who have decided that we can articulate issues that affect us without fear or favor, without compromising, anything. So the shack dwellers movement that is based in South Africa was started in 2005. It's now one of the biggest social movements to have emerged in post-apartheid South Africa. We have over 100,000 membership that are, active in this movement. Now, the Fanon today is really interesting for Abahlali because what was discovered 60 years ago comes to effect and is relevant to our struggle today, which is why we are kind of proud to be engaging in this book and to be engaging Frantz Fanon in the context of our day-to-day struggle. Now, part of the contribution, obviously, on the book that has been edited by Nigel Gibson is, of course, the revelation that Abahlali struggle has been paid in blood. We continue to face these difficulties. Even today, one would recall how Fanon deal with the issue of racism, oppression, and his very courageous stance on the exploitation of workers and so on. So today, when we engage him, obviously we find strength to some of his great thoughts at that time. Nobody knew that 60 years to come, Black African people will continue to be exploited, will continue to live in mud like pigs, as Abahlali continue, to face today. So we have drawn many lessons, obviously, without even having read Frantz Fanon. But when we engage Fanon, we then come to a conclusion that what we come to see today, what we come to realize, what we come to learn today is something that he has articulated very well 60 years ago, which makes the book very relevant today. So I just want to locate Fanon, therefore, in the context of Abahlali's struggle for a number of reasons. Because as a grassroots organization, we are confronted with exploitation, we are confronted with oppression, we are confronted with racism, and all kinds of poverty that we know that the neoliberal agenda continues to advance in order to keep us in deep poverty. So we have had to work hard as the movement to actually talk about this, think about what is going on, but more importantly, think about how do we free ourselves, from the oppression that we face. Which is why then it became very important, very relevant for us to really start organizing masses, because we believe that the power of the masses will ultimately bring about the desired change that we want. Now, our struggle would focus on land, decent housing, and dignity. As you would know that if you are poor and Black in South Africa and probably across the globe, you would be taken for granted. Your lives would be vandalized. We have been facing that. Just now, Nigel has reminded us that we have been in court just yesterday for the comrades who have been charged with very serious charges of murder as a way to oppress them, but as a way to silence them, because these are the comrades who have really shown courage in leading the struggle of the oppressed from below. The Ekenana comrades who have successfully built their commune. They have done an amazing work in reflecting, but also educating Abahlali the kind of a society that we envision when we continue to talk about socialism, and the kind of a society that we are looking up to. So Ekenana is one of the best example of the commune that we have always dreamt about. And therefore, the state has mastered that, the enemy has mastered that. It has to crush what is emerging in Ekenana. It is for that reason why the entire movement have had to rally its support in defense of the Ekenana occupation, in defense of the Frantz Fanon school, by the way, that the community has built, in defense of the cooperatives of poetry, in defense of the community hall, in defense of the spaza shop that is run by the community, in defense of the community gardens named after our late Nkululeko Gwala. So all these cooperatives in the form of commune are really an attempt to educate us all that this is not the abstract idea of what we want to achieve in the near future. So by doing this, Abahlali is aiming at drawing a line that if we have to be rich, let us all be rich. If we have to be poor, let us all be poor, because everyone has to work very hard for what we have, which is why the question of land becomes so central in Abahlali's struggle. However, in all these efforts of really trying to give an alternative direction to what we can do in relation to fighting the capital system that has failed the mass working class. All these attempts by Abahlali to put an alternative route on the table for all of us to see and maybe to explore, because we have to try one way or the other. We cannot just be stuck in this kind of liberal agenda that have make sure that it only enriches those who are the masters of the systems, who know what is happening, the few that are actually driving the agenda of capitalism. So all these efforts have been attacked in many ways. Abahlali have paid a very price for organizing, for articulating these questions, but for confirming that the work of many intellectuals, and of course, Frantz Fanon today, would have to be defended, would have to help us clear our thinking without now having to read from books, but a day-to-day praxis of what all these thinkings have to say, because it would not help us just to dream at some point. We need to get onto the soil and dirty our hands so that we can at some point agree or disagree that the intellectual thinking is really going to bring about change that we all want. Now, all these Abahlali's efforts are being crushed left and right. Comrades have been arrested on trumped up charges. This is not the set of comrades, the 6 comrades that are facing criminal justice as we speak. I mean, the 3 were released on Wednesday, which we are happy, but it became clear from the court proceedings that there was nothing that really linked them to a murder case, which was very dangerous and damaging. It damages the reputation of the organization. The comrades that have been arrested and their families have had to go through difficult times. We know that the message about what is happening is to create fear that those who are courageous in the fight against the system that oppresses us are to face these kind of difficulties. So they are not only arrested, we have faced even torture in the police cells. We've been slandered in the media, we have been beaten, we have also been killed. There are lives that have been lost. So when we say, therefore, that the power of Abahlali has been paid in blood, we really mean that people have suffered. Many of our activists have scars on their back for really standing firm for what is right and what we think should be an alternative in this troubling economic system that we are facing. So fortunately, we've been able to build a very strong movement with people who are very courageous, but also principled in the face of all kinds of threats, including death threats that you may think of. People have stood very firm. It has been a matter of do or die. I think comrades have really realized that it's a do or die. So it will not help us to allow ourselves to be exploited and oppressed, because if we do so, it means we allow ourselves to be killed slowly. So what is right is really to stand firm for what is right. And this is what Abahlali is engaging right now. So there are really these deep challenges that we face in Shack Settlement, but the movement has really become a hope in many ways because of the courage that the organization has indicated that it is possible to really stand against all of these forces. Now, there has been a lot of achievement in the midst of these difficulties. I On the book, obviously, I talk more about the challenges, the price that is so high for anyone to endure. But there are also achievements that I just want to touch on quickly. In the midst of all these challenges that the organization face. So we've been able to keep thousands of families on their homes who otherwise would have been evicted, who otherwise would have been homeless because of the manner in which the state operates. So we were able to keep these thousands of families in their homes. We have successfully occupied vacant and unused land so that the landless and those that are homeless can actually find a home. It has been the duty of the movement and not of anybody else, but it's been a collective work that we were able to contribute in the just struggle for land and housing. But we have been able to build and remain a people's movement, a people's home. People have been able to find hope in the collective work that Abahlali are engaging with much more engaging in solidarity work between and within struggling communities, not only in South Africa, but across the globe. I think solidarity has been the foundation of the work that Abahlali has done in order to unite the human race. I think Comrade Nigel has just reminded us how the 3 comrades who were released in prison 2 days ago were welcome in the international way. The song that was really encouraging every human race that it is important that we become more human, and this is what we commit ourselves, and we think it's very important. Hence, solidarity plays an important role. We know that part of the reason why we were able to win in the court, it has been through the solidarity messages, support in various ways from comrades from around the world, which we deeply appreciate. We've been able to fight the gender inequality and the insensitivity, especially at this time of COVID-19. Cases of gender violence has increased actually. So it's been the duty of the movement to build these ways in which we can live in harmony, irrespective of the gender difficulties that from time to time people would face. So these are some of the achievements that Abahlali continue to do. But what we have seen in Ekenana, as we continue to see, is that any power, any progress that gets made by Abahlali gets paid in blood. I mean, look at the comrades who have had to spend 6 months in prison for the crime that they have not done. So these are some of the examples that keeps us in this struggle. Because if we do not, I'm not too sure the extent of the damage that would have happened in our communities. The inequalities continue to be the order of the day. Poverty, the high rate of unemployment. I mean, South Africa has reported more than almost 50% of the country's population are unemployed, with youth, more than 73% of young people are not working. So this has created anxiety, frustration, and what we have experienced in July, the food riots that we've never seen. So Fanon has warned about, that the suffering of the people would not go unchallenged. We have seen this, and we continue to see that the oppressive system may be successful now, but on daily basis, people are trying to find ways in which they can escape exploitation, oppression, poverty, and all other social ills that are working against the working class. So I just want to conclude, comrades, by saying it has not been easy. working, in engaging in the struggle of the shack dwellers movement. Like many social movements around the world will tell you that indigenous people are often excluded from benefiting from any economic activity. In fact, we get ripped off from what we have created ourselves, what has been given to us by nature, land, and so on. All the territories have been taken away from us, which really strips off our dignity. These calls for us to continue to stand firm for what is right, but we'll only win this battle when we are able to organize so that all these great minds and thinking of that are happening on daily basis, they can only find weight and space when they are supported by popular masses. So Abahlali will continue to organize in order to give effect to the work that Fanon undertaken years ago. So the Fanon today will only succeed and will only make sense when it's not just intellectual thinking about it, but those of us who are really in the forefront of the struggle can actually give effect to this thinking and concur and confirm that actually what has been thought 60 years ago is still relevant. Hence, Fanon today is relevant for the work that we do. There's so much lessons that we can draw, but also those who think about the work of Fanon every day would have done a great job if they do so in consultation and of course observing what the current situation is in grassroots activism. So I just want to leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Nigel.
Thank you, Spoo. What I just want to underscore is the Frantz Fanon School at Ekanana, and the fact that it's not just a school of education. It's as Spoo argues, a school for clarifying the struggle. In other words, directly related to day-to-day struggle. There's an immediacy to the day-to-day struggle, but I also think what's fascinating in what Spoo was arguing about in terms of trying to create this commune outside of the state, so to speak, is also the battle of our ideas and the continuing thinking that's going on, that's related to the idea of trying to create the vision of the future in the present, and that very much related to the sort of concrete situation of people who are under threat of eviction and violence and so forth. This continued violence in post-apartheid South Africa, this continued state violence that you cannot escape. And I just want to also say that Fanon's connection to South Africa is one that goes back, of course, to Steve Biko, to Black consciousness movement, and the idea of Fanon's thought being alive is something that has continued to be part of social movements in South Africa, both against apartheid and after the end of formal apartheid. The other thing that I thought was important in terms of what Spoo was saying, and relates to Leah Tosold's chapter, is the question of land and the post-colonial situation in Brazil and in South Africa, where the expropriation of land continues, and the fact that those quote unquote indigenous people are still being expropriated from their land. And I think that's and the notion of solidarity, one of the first declarations of solidarity with Abahlali and yesterday Wednesday when the three comrades were released from jail, but others remained in jail, was from MST, in Brazil. So there are ongoing living relationships between, in this case, South Africa and Brazil. So I want to introduce Leah Tosold, who's talking about, and again, it's a question of existence as resistance. That's the title of her chapter, Territorializing Existence as Resistance. And talking about self-determination processes in Amazonia. Leah.
Hi, can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to thank you all, Nigel, Firoze, Toussaint, Bois. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. It has been also an honor and an immense pleasure to be part of the collective work that made this book possible in spite of everything. For me, this book is very powerful and inspiring. And as such, it is a huge contribution for the times we are living. I have learned so much from the process that materialized this book, which was permeated by love and confidence. And being at the same side of the trench, I deeply wish to be able to meet you all in person once. So, I was already introduced. I am a Brazilian researcher and activist, and among other collectives, I am a member of the Anti-Racist and Anti-Colonial Studies Intervention Collective, which is known by the name GIRA, and a member of the São Paulo Solidarity Committee to the resistance struggles in the Tapajós River region in Amazonia, which is called Contapajós. I have a PhD in political theory at the University of São Paulo, and I just started working now as a postdoctoral researcher at the Free University of Berlin. And as engaged scholar and activist, I work specially on feminist anti-racist epistemologies in order to reflect on collective forms of existence as resistance in contexts in which violence is naturalized and ongoing. And this is the case of Brazil as well. Yes. So in the chapter I wrote, I propose a Fanonian reading of the Munduruku and the Riverside people's remarkable process of resistance to the construction of dams in the middle Tapajós River in Amazonia. And I focus especially in the years between 2013 and 2015, where there was a severe attempt by both the Brazilian state and the private contractors to impose the dams in the region, expropriating the traditional peoples that live there from their territories. So in the middle of already alarming timber and gold exploitation in the region, the construction of mega dams in the middle Tapajós River region, if accomplished, would not only flood their territories, the territories that are inhabited by the Munduruku and the Riverside peoples, irreversibly affecting their lives and the environment as a whole, but would also foster large-scale gold mining, as it happened in the case of the controversial Belo Montes Dam at the Xingu River, and also the expansion of soybeans plantations and cattle fields in the region by making the river navigable for the export of these products. So this is the aim of the construction of the dams there. So in such a context, if the Tapajós River continues to be the last major free-flowing river in Amazonia, this is undoubtedly due to the resistance of the Munduruku and the Riverside peoples in the region. The writing of the chapter draws especially on a collective long-term engagement in an autonomous collective, which is based in São Paulo. It's the Contapajós collective. Along the years, we have been engaged in supporting the Munduruku and the Riverside people's struggles in the Tapajós region through activities, events, and also less visible work that aimed at disseminating reliable information and meaningful forms of engagement with the ongoing struggles in the region. So we organized public discussions, film screenings, urban interventions aimed at calling attention to their struggles. We also disseminated zines, organized a periodical radio program. We helped to translate into other languages the Munduruku letters, spreading their words in activist circles in other parts of the world. We also tried to raise funds for the resistance actions in the region, as for instance, the Munduruku General Assemblies and the so-called self-demarcation process of their territories. For distances in the region are large and transport is also very expensive there. So one of our main goals was to enable meaningful connections between different social struggles. For instance, between urban social movements and the struggles of traditional peoples in Amazonia. And also to foster exchange of the Munduruku people with other indigenous peoples in Brazil and abroad. Usually analysis of resistance processes are framed as exclusively reactive to the colonial or neo-colonial schema. And in this sense, analysis of resistance processes are usually captured in attempts of inclusion in an excluding schema. Yes. Such a reactive analytical perspective hinders the political imagination regarding other forms of existing collectively, making the colonization processes, as Kay Wayne and Ivtak points it, coincide with the very expansion of the nation state. Fanon's work, however, allows us to see that much more is at stake in such contextual resistance struggles. Fanon's sharp critique to the nationalist parties, grounded on his sensibility regarding a contextual restructuring of the world, in other terms than the one imposed by the colonial schema, enables us to apprehend the potential of certain modes of contextual collective self-determination processes that are not primarily nor exclusively referenced to the hegemonic norms and laws. In other words, collective self-determination processes with Fanon can be regarded as propositive moves that enable, and I use Fanon's words, to tense our muscles and our brains in a new direction, going beyond mere oppositional forms of action that end up reproducing the very same neocolonial schema they criticize. In this sense, a Fanonian reading enables more than the identification of resistance practices in a context ruled by total violence. It also enhances our political imagination with already existing other possible forms of living and organizing collectively. It is the proper mode of existence of the Munduruku and the Riverside peoples, with their own standards of reference, that contextually orient resistance process and the establishment of other possible forms of common living. Thus, in the chapter, I argue that Fanon allows us to realize that the force of the Munduruku and the Riverside peoples lies, first and foremost, in their existence as resistance, that is, in their potential for collective and propositive self-organization based on their own terms. In other words, their capacity for resistance does not emanate from a merely reactive position, restricted to the denouncement of the alleged failures of the Brazilian state to comply with laws and international treaties, as for instance, the Brazilian Constitution or the Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization. Instead of proposing corrections or adjustments to them, and so run the risk of being held hostage of the modus operandi of such norms, these peoples patently expose the limits or even the bad faith that are inherent to them. As I argue along with Fanon, this potential to denaturalize the hegemonic norms stems precisely from the primordial and daily commitment of the Munduruku and the Riverside peoples with their own modes of social, political, and economic organization, which confers them a perspective of their own, not only to strategically access and deals with the norms, discourses, and actions of the government and the private sector, but also to establish a fundamentally distinctive way of acting, one that triggers the possibility of unleashing unpredictable and co-moving movements of resistance that are able to reverse the conditions in favor of the traditional peoples of the forest, even under enormous disparity in terms of power balance. I will not be able to enter here in the details of the argument in the chapter, so I just briefly point the three key events of the Munduruku and the Riverside people's resistance process that structure my chapter. First, the occupation of the construction site of the Belo Monte Dam in the Xingu River, which was, the construction site was at that moment, at its peak, mobilizing more than 20,000 workers 24 hours a day. The occupation not only literally stopped the construction of the dam for almost a month, but also one called attention to the dam's construction project in the Tapajós region, and two, helped to delegitimize attempts of criminalization of the Munduruku and the Riverside peoples by the government through an increase of social movements networks of support produced by the publication of open letters during the occupation. Second, I focus on the process of elaboration of the Munduruku Consultation Protocol, which politicizes the Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization, the one that establishes the prerogative of free, prior, and informed consultation regarding any state intervention in indigenous territories, by tying up form and content. That is, the protocol indicates, the Munduruku consultation protocols indicate that the form of the consultation, the consultation is undertaken is as important as the content that emanates from it, so that a prior consultation only finds validity if it is conducted in the Munduruku and the Riverside people's terms, that is, according to their own territoriality and temporality. This action helped to expose the lack of veto power of the affected peoples and the governmental strategies to demobilize resistance in the use of the Convention 169. Third, and finally, I focus on the process that led to the action of self-demarcation of their own territory, which exposed the underpinning understanding of territory in the law as merely private property, and the bad faith of the federal government in dealing with the struggles of the Middle Tapajós River region, on the one hand, and on the other hand, strengthened local resistance through the fostering of proper modes of collective existence in face of enormous conflicts and pressures that were occurring there in the region. We can, of course, talk more about it later. For now, I just want to finish by saying that the struggle of the Munduruku and the Riverside people is both urgent and inspiring. It is urgent because destruction follows that stride. And it's inspiring for all of us because it is about how life can flourish and in spite of everything. So for both reasons, I am very happy to have contributed to spread these words in this book. And I hope it will keep reverberating in unpredictable ways. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Leah. I think your point about the form of consultation being as important as the content, and it relates to your quote from Fanon about enabling our muscles and our brains in a new direction. It is connected because it's really, you're really talking about trying to imagine new social relations and practice new social relations within the context of violence, which obviously connects to going to connect to both what Toussaint is talking about and what Spoo has spoken about. So how do you do that? Inside the carceral system in the United States. Fanon, of course, died in the United States as he was hoping to live a little longer and get what was then the most advanced treatment for leukemia. But he wasn't keen on coming to the United States, which he called a nation of lynchers. It's interesting, James Yucky Sales' book, The Making of Meditations on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, which is part of the title, which is part of what Toussaint is talking about, very much is connected to both the continued discussion of Frantz Fanon, especially within Black America and among not only among Black American intellectuals, but the Wretched of the Earth of the United States, and the revolt and reason of the Wretched of the Earth in the United States. And it is a most amazing piece of work that's created within the prison system. And the second element of Toussaint's, just to introduce his chapter, the second element of Toussaint's work is an engagement with Sanienka Shakur, who died in June this year, and was found in a homeless encampment, who spent many of his years in prison, and Toussaint talks about how he started to engage Fanon and started to understand a politics, what he called a new African communism through Fanon. So in other words, again, it's about imagining a new politics, imagining new social relations from what might be considered zones of non-existence, which gets us back to Leah's point that resistance, it's the relationship of resistance to existence, to conceptualizing a new form of existence. So Toussaint, I don't want to take too much time.
No, thank you for that that wonderful introduction, and really grateful to be able to join the panel today, and specifically want to send all my love and solidarity to the comrades in South Africa. They have taught me so much, and really so much of the credit for being able to think through some of the issues that James Yaqui Sales, some of the ways that he offers a reinterpretation or a new way of thinking about Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, like my own ability to grasp and sort of build on much of what Sales is trying to do, much of what Yaqui is trying to do. A lot of the credit of that goes to the comrades in South Africa, having had an opportunity to work with Abahlali Basem Jondolo, the Western Cape Anti-Eviction Campaign. It's really having, over a decade ago, had a chance to sit alongside some of those comrades that I had to go back to Fanon and sort of try to revisit and kind of reconceptualize some of the points that I saw raised in that classic text. And it's sort of building off of that, that kind of lesson on the ground and lesson in practice that comrades Sabu spoke about earlier, that I wanted to offer this chapter as a way of, very much as Nigel was talking about, kind of appreciating the profound impact that that Fanon's work and his thought has had on the struggle of Black folks here in the United States. And in particular, the work of James Yaqui Sales in his meditations on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth is particularly insightful, because part of what we see taking place in Yaqui's meditations is an attempt to reinterpret in a really fantastic way what Fanon was trying to do in Wretched of the Earth. And it's also fantastic in the sense that, probably most of us know that the United States has the world's largest prison system, not just in a contemporary sense, but, in history. And that with, 2.1 million people behind bars, that significant number, somewhere up to between 30 and 40% of those are people of African descent. And what few of us know about, and is one of the reasons why I hope folks get an opportunity to engage with this text, is really the kind of fantastic record of struggle that has taken place behind bars, and in many ways in a complicated relationship with the explosion of the prison system that's happened over the past 40, 50 years. And Yaqui was someone who was very much in the midst of that. From a young age, he was locked up and got a fair amount of his political education behind bars, and contributed to a number of key struggles taking place in Illinois, in the Midwest United States, as not only a jailhouse lawyer and organizer, but as an intellectual and really campaign strategist. And in that way, he really kind of had an opportunity to both see some of the advances and also some of the pitfalls of the struggles taking place during the course of the 1960s, really this kind of high point that many of us look to in terms of Fanon's influence on the struggles in the United States. And it's really kind of building off of that, off of the record of those struggles, and really trying to appreciate some of their pitfalls that you see Yaqui eventually turning just to Wretched of the Earth as a text that he wants to engage with and really spend some time trying to unpack. And I just want to just highlight a couple key points of that text, and part of what key points of Yaqui's meditations, and just highlight some of the ways in which I try to engage in them in the course of this chapter in a way that I hope is meaningful for folks. One of the things I think is important to just highlight is Yaqui is very humble about the difficulties of engaging with Wretched of the Earth. He's very, clear about the fact that when he first read the text or he first encountered it, he thought he understood it. He thought he particularly understood what he sensed was this call for revolutionary violence and for armed struggle, and really kind of took from it that kind of political counterviolence and militant resistance was the order of the day. And he is clear about the fact that it would take him years to kind of go back and unpack the text and make sense of it. And in doing so, he offers a pretty unique way of reading Wretched of the Earth. He suggests that really you can't read it in a traditional kind of linear sense, that you have to appreciate the fact that there are points that Fanon raises in one chapter that he picks up in another chapter and then continue into another chapter. And then when you drill into that kind of the way those lines of reasoning cut through the book in ways that might confuse a rather sort of traditional reading of it, Yaqui suggests that kind of what's at the core of the text is this question of decolonization, but it's played out in a way in which Fanon uses different voices throughout the text. He uses the voice of the colonial subject or the native or the Negro at one point in one chapter, and in that same chapter uses the voice of the ex-Negro, or the ex-Native, the individual who's kind of begun to reject colonialism. And then even in that same chapter later on, we'll use the voice of the individual who has thrown off the shackles of colonialism and now finds themselves in a post-colonial situation. And that part of what Fanon is trying to do, Yaqui suggests, he argues that part of what Fanon is trying to do in using these different voices is to play out in real time the process of decolonization, and to kind of walk us as readers through what it makes, kind of what are the different phenomena of that process of decolonization. And in doing so is trying to attune us to some of the key elements of that broader colonial process, with the ultimate aim of really helping us to kind of transform our own consciousness. And this question of transforming one's own consciousness at an individual and at a collective level is really fundamental to Fanon's objective in the text and this this broader process of decolonization. And so what's really fantastic about what Yaqui seeks to do in his own meditations on Wretched of the Earth is to actually kind of put forward a primer for those who are aspiring kind of political militants who are behind bars, and to try to give them a leg up in terms of trying to make sense of Wretched of the Earth, but to do so in a way that's not simply about telling them this is how you read the text, but really trying to raise key questions that they can ask of it, and in do so demonstrate to them the ways in which it's key to not simply be trained kind of what to think, but really how to think critically and how to think with an eye towards questioning everything eventually, and being in the kind of the position not only as cadre members, as his comrades, but really how the whole kind of the broader question of revolution and national liberation is about this process of questioning everything and being in the position to use that or to see that process of critically examining the world around us as a means by which we can collectively raise our consciousness to a higher level. And so Fanon Yaqui is interested in showing how the examples of that in Wretched of the Earth can be useful for those who are trying to even behind bars, even in the sort of zone of non-being, to transform their own consciousness, to engage themselves in a process of political struggle, and to see that struggle as something that can be a piece of a larger revolutionary project. And one of the things that I try to do in the chapter is to highlight how that is not only something that Yaqui does on paper, but he actually does in conversation with Soyinka Shakur, who's one of the most prominent prisoners in a different part of the United States, in California, but is increasingly, during the course of the 1980s and 1990s, becoming an important political figure as Shakur develops as a prison intellectual. So these are really some of the things I try to highlight in the chapter, both drawing on Yaqui's own writing, but also trying to show how his dialogue with Shakur, with other prisoners, is in and of itself a process of helping to encourage them to embark on a kind of the path of their own personal transformation, and that how that particular relationship between Yaqui, who's in prison in Illinois, and Shakur, who's in prison in California, is a dynamic one, and is, as I said, illustrative of what Yaqui is attempting to do in his meditations. These pamphlets that he produced over a period of time during the last decades of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. But also the ways in which he sees that project of kind of transforming one's consciousness as really an example of what a broader political struggle and the broader process of decolonization is particularly about. And so, yeah, it's really with an eye towards trying to really elucidate the ways in which this is a unique and a really profound way of making sense of really what many of us hopefully would admit are some of the complicated aspects of Wretched of the Earth that I wanted to offer through this chapter. I wanted to really highlight the kind of unique contributions of James Yaqui Sayles as a prison intellectual who was influenced by folks like George Jackson and other revolutionaries of the 60s and 70s, who then went on to offer his own really key contributions. But also the way in which, as much as prisons might be sort of looked at as a place kind of cut off and sort of disconnected from society, and that this broader process of mass incarceration that we have here in the United States, that it sort of emerged in a way that is largely uncontested, that political struggle has been very much a part of trying to challenge this buildup of the prison system in the United States. And that even today, that we've really seen a profound resurgence of prison organizing, prison activism, trying to kind of create more access to the broader society, kind of further appreciation for prisoner rights, but in kind of in a way that influences a lot of the focus on police and prison abolition today, calls for finding ways to end prisons as we know them. And that this struggle that has been impacted or is manifested in prison strikes in California, most notably in 2011 and 2013, rounds of national prison strikes over the past 4 or 5 years here in the US. And just recently, this past summer, there was a national prison strike. That these struggles have been influenced by Yaqui's ideas, and particularly his interpretations of Fanon. And that this question of Fanon today is something that we see very much alive behind bars, and in very different ways, trying to have an impact on pushing forward pushing forward the struggle in a way that is very much in tune with Fanon's own kind of revolutionary socialist humanism, right? This focus on really how do we uplift human beings and try to really instill that we create the kind of society that deeply values human life, and that that's something that's worth fighting for. So I'll stop there, and very much looking forward to the further conversation.
Yeah, before we continue on this, there's an interesting question posed by Jean Reed. You spent some time on Sanika Shakur in your chapter for the book. Was there any discussion on the 92 rebellion in LA? And he says, great contribution indeed, as I think all of us think so too.
No, thank you for the question. I didn't spend very much time talking about the 92 rebellion. And I think if I'm assuming correctly, part of what Eugene Reed is pointing to is that really it's after the rebellion that Sanika Shakur, then kind of more broadly known as Monster Cody Scott, really gained prominence on a nationwide level. And one of the things that's particularly interesting is that Sanika Shakur's brother, who was on the streets at the time, was a key figure in the gang truce that happened just before the rebellion took place in South Central Los Angeles. But I didn't include that, in part because I really wanted to try to build on Shakur's own writing and the way in which he particularly maps out this relationship, this transformative relationship between him and Yaqui. And one of the things that I did want to highlight, in part with this focus on some of the struggles that are taking place behind bars, is the way in which that dialogue between Shakur and Yaqui influences some of not only some of the kind of prison, the more recent instances of rebellion, but another dynamic of this effort at building unity across not gang affiliations as what happened in 1992, but actually some of the racial boundaries that are key flashpoints for violent conflict in the California prison system. And there was this agreement to end hostilities. There was a key point of some of the hunger strikes that took place in 2011 and 2013 that brought together white, Latino, and Black prisoners. And I wanted to be able to demonstrate how some of Yaqui's own focus on deconstructing how we think about race helped to influence not only Shakur, but other prisoners who were involved in crafting these efforts to build unity amongst folks who are imprisoned, oppressed in various different ways, to build unity across these boundaries and to really create a more robust struggle through that unity.
Seems we've lost, oh no, here he is. There you are. Spoo is back. I think problems with electricity there. Yes, Nigel, I think we've lost you there. There you're back. Okay.
I didn't think I left. Let's open up. Let's see if there's any. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, over to you. Yes.
Well, I thought since we've only got 20 minutes, whether we should see if there's any questions from the audience.
Yeah. There's from William Barata in the DRC. My question goes to Dr. Lear. The kind of resistance developed in the chapter leans towards a kind of resistance in the architecture of the arsenal of the decolonization process. more a comment than a question. But do you want to respond to that, Leah?
Yes, thanks, William. I have sometimes people say, well, should we engage with the state or not? But the question is, it's not possible not to engage. Otherwise, you are simply, they pass like a tractor over you. So they have to deal and to negotiate. But they cannot trust the laws. They cannot trust the rule of law, let's say. So it's so important to have their own standards of reference in order to be able to question this norm and also to reveal the violence that is implied in these norms. So I think this is the most important aspect of the whole. And you are right. I thank you very much for your comment.
I think the question actually, I think Spoo may have something interesting to say about the question too. In other words, I don't know if you heard it, Spoo, but it's about engaging with the state or not engaging with the state. And I think that, what I've always been interested about Abahlali is its criticism of the architecture of the state, the offices kind of in the government completely alienated from life in the shacks, but also your willingness to continue to make negotiations with the state, even though they have continued to break their promises.
Spoo, do you want to respond? I have a feeling there's a delay in the sound going. Spoo, can you hear us? Okay, that's a shame, because I think it's a really important point that's been raised, and it's engagement of the state.
Yes,
okay.
But I am battling with the network and this kind of cutting.
Sure.
So I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Are you able to hear me on your side?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes, I of course I didn't get the question clear, but I got the part where you talk about
Whoops.
Oh dear. You keep losing him. Yeah, I'm afraid we've lost him. But just a comment I want to make while we're waiting for him to come back is Abahlali has been very systematic in engaging with the organs of the state. But one of the things that they've shown is that without the mobilization of the people, it means nothing. It is the voice of the people on the streets that shifts the balance of forces, whether one's talking about the judiciary or you're talking about some bureaucrat sitting in a nice cozy place. Here he is back again. Spoo, you're back.
Yeah. Can I try that once more?
Please.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. I seem to be struggling with the network. Yes, I got the part where you kind of want to hear our thinking around engaging the state or not engaging the state, if I got that correctly. So what we have decided as Abahlali is rather to engage ourselves on what we want, and allow the state to be its own entity. But ultimately, what we want is to have control over the state. So there cannot be a state without the people. So we are engineering our own future, which ultimately we must impose on the state, because the state has to be a vehicle, an agent from which the people should be able to use to advance its interest. So the state cannot be a separate entity, but because it is rotten as it is, we do not want to be engaging it at this point. We would rather focus our energy by engaging ourselves, creating ideas and alternatives amongst ourselves. And when that is ready, we are actually cooking a food here. So once it is ready, then we must be able to use the state to our advantage. So the state should be a machinery to advance the cause of the people. It should not be seen as two separate institutions. So the people should be able to have control over the state. So engaging the state in its current
internet access for the non-beings, yeah? This is a perennial problem. Looks like we've lost him again. Okay, I think I hear him come back. You're back again.
No, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry about it. But what we have opted to do is rather to create our own space, prepare ourselves, let us mold our own ideas. Then ultimately, then the state will have to respond to what the people need. So right now, we will do everything outside the state.
Right. We have a few more questions coming in from Zainab Verji. How does one describe the tension between canonization and decanonization, especially in this juncture? The 60th anniversary and neoliberal appropriation of the language, consciousness, solidarity, and resistance. Good one. Anyone want to go for that? There.
I'm not sure if I understood it correctly, so it's better to hear before and then I can engage.
Okay.
Well, let me just respond. Yes, Fanon is being canonized in academic institutions. There's no doubt about that. And this book, in terms of a celebration of 60 years of the Wretched of the Earth, and its focus on movements from below, thinking about Fanon, finding ways in which to use Fanon, whether that's in the shacks or in the prisons, the movements of people, the movements of masses of people. As I started this conversation, has a resonance with what Fanon was writing The Wretched of the Earth for, in his reflections on the revolutions and movements of the late 1950s and until his death. I mean, that's what The Wretched of the Earth was. So The Wretched of the Earth is an incredibly critical book. And also, as Toussaint mentioned, a work of revolutionary humanism. And so, as much as Fanon is discussed discursively, with the emphasis on Fanon's Fanon's intellectual forebears, whoever that may well be. I think the other side of it is, Fanon is also not only a thinker, but also a man of action. And this relationship between action and movement, his own self-movement, is essential to thinking about how Fanon cannot be canonized because he's always moving. Yeah. And it's that movement of his ideas that still has a kind of still speaks with living movements today, whether that the ones that we've spoken about on the panel this afternoon.
I mean, I think that reminds me of Paul Gilroy's comments about the book. He said these exhilarating essays and commentaries put his incendiary contribution back where it belongs, in the insurgent speculations and reconstructive efforts to create thinkers struggling to transform the imperiled predicament of our planet. I think that really nicely sums it up. One of the things that, a couple of things that strike me in all three of these presentations is what comes across is that although there are localized struggles, very particular to particular environments, what emerges is something much larger than the particular. There is an expression of a certain universalism that comes out of those struggles. And to what extent do you feel that this is an inevitable product of struggles that go beyond thinking in a very particular or particularist thing? In other words, although it is dealing with a very specific, it provides a generalization that is much more universal.
Yes, maybe the idea that what is more abstract and what is particular are, binaries. I have the feeling from the work or the activism work there in the Tapajós region, the more you engage in this reality, better connections you are able to establish with movements around the world. And I feel this is very much present in Fanon's work also, and it's very well noticed at Firoze.
Toussaint.
Yeah, I would just add on to that and maybe try to tackle a little bit of what William is raising in the comments. I think let me see the comment there. I think it's very much a testament to Fanon's work that it has this capacity to kind of drawing on the example, particularly of the Algerian Revolution, but just tries to think more broadly and more generally about this kind of broader struggle against colonialism and against post-colonialism as well too, the post-colonial situation. And I think the thing that is, I think, noticeable about all the works that we're looking at is that there's this dynamic to not only appreciate the particular elements of the struggle that's taking place, but also see them in the context of a broader sort of universal. And, I think there's a variety of different reasons for that, but I wouldn't be surprised if one key element of that is this sort of strain of revolutionary humanism that obviously is in Fanon's work, but the way in which it's, the way that it shows up in more contemporary struggles speaks consistently to that kind of broader ability to be generalized. And then just real quickly to what William was asking about, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but Fanon, sorry, Yaqui is a New African and a proponent of New African nationalism and New African kind of New African consciousness is a framework that emerged in the 1960s as a way to understand the struggle for Black liberation as a national liberation struggle, and to say that what in struggling for self-determination and socialism, what Black folks were struggling for wasn't a kind of form of political liberation that was based simply on questions of skin color, but was based on a struggle to end a form of national oppression. And without getting too much into the details, New African identity was really coined as a way of thinking in national terms as opposed to simply questions of, like what you look like or what have you, as a way of talking about this question of nationality, and was very much influenced by how by struggles that were taking place in the global South and Fanon's own work, but an understanding of how elements of the global South exist in the global North, and particularly for people of African descent in the United States and other parts of the North. There's a long history of seeing our struggles as very much linked and intertwined with those struggles taking place in the global South, whether it's Brazil, South Africa, Algeria, what have you. And so what Yaqui was talking about, and sort of what I kind of tried to signal in terms of this question of setting afoot a new people, was that it was important to kind of reground in a sense of like what this question of kind of nationhood or nationality might be. But for Yaqui, he was very much attend to not only understanding, like to having he had a politics that he termed New African Communism, and he was actually to the left of many of those within the New African liberation struggle, in that he understood the potential for this national liberation, again, to be one that would be fundamentally about deconstructing our notions of race, that wouldn't simply see a kind of a liberated New Africa as one that's simply defined by the fact that you're, a Black person today, and that, you would be a part of this new nation later. But that also people had to wrestle with this question of how to critically reimagine their relationship to the circumstances that they find themselves in. And so setting afoot a new people really was about how we organize in a way that encourages people to challenge and transform the way they think about the world around them. And in that process of transforming their consciousness, be about the work of transforming the world around them.
Yeah. Nigel.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we've run out of time, and it's been wonderful to have you all on this panel. I'm sorry Spoo had some technical difficulties, but that's also the material reality in which we live. If you don't have electricity, for one. So I just want to thank everyone, and I'll turn it back to you, Firoze.
Okay, well, don't leave the studio while I say end the show, because we can have a little chat immediately after. But yes, no, thank you very much, all of you, for this extraordinary discussion. Really three of another 20 other discussions that are planned to take place in this book, and which we'll be returning to a further discussion on Fanon today on the 16th, I think, of October, and we will be having 3 or 4 more contributing authors. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who participated. There were so many more questions that we could have taken on, but I hope you will understand that we can't keep this conversation going all the time. But if you'd like to get a copy of Fanon Today, Reason and Revolt of the Wretched of the Earth, that's the link to our website. And if you can't afford to buy the printed book, you can download the PDF for free, but we'll always ask you for a donation to keep us going. So with that, this is Firoze Manji wishing you all well, and thank you for joining us.